And I now give the floor to members of the Security Council. I give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
I thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank ASG Simonovic for his extensive briefing. The presence of the Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights and OSCE in and reporting from eastern Ukraine remain essential. Such missions register and report facts on the ground, identify existing gaps in the government policies, and in the case of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, offer important recommendations to the Ukrainian government, which need to be followed up on as the country's leadership is undertaking comprehensive constitutional and administrative reforms necessary for Ukraine to recover after years of corruption and neglect, as well as the impact of the current crisis. These missions register the countless and continuous human rights violations caused by Russian-supported armed separatists who, under false pretexts of self-determination and violations of minority rights, have dealt a blow to the rule of law and human rights in the region as they persist in their efforts to erode Ukraine's sovereignty and destroy its territorial integrity. As the ASG just referred to, a reign of fear and terror in the rebel-ruled areas prevails. The latest report also points out that law and order in rebel-held areas has collapsed. Rule of law has been substituted, in fact, by the rule of the gun. Details provided by the report reveal the true nature of the militant separatists and their imported leaders, whom their main sponsor Russia has time and again sought in this chamber to portray as mere peaceful protesters. The trademark activities of these so-called peaceful protesters, as the report points out, includes intimidations, abductions, illegal detentions, torture and ill treatment, as well as deliberate targeting of critical public utilities, illegal occupation and seizing of public and private properties, bank robberies and attacks on coal mines. To date, 104 buildings remain seized by these illegal armed groups. Such illegally occupied public buildings are often used to detain and torture civil activists, journalists and political opponents. Armed separatists have seized warehouses, factories, using their premises as training camps or military repair shops. Such actions, as well as their threats and invitations, led to a shutdown of many factories, causing unemployment in the region to soar. The separatists abducted, as the AG has just said, some 925 people. The whereabouts of some 465 remain unknown. Just this week, 3 Red Cross employees were reportedly kidnapped and are kept in detention by the armed militants. None of these actions, all clear and criminal violations of human rights law, have ever been condemned by Russia, which has instead repeatedly sought council condemnation of Ukraine for its legitimate efforts to restore law and order in the east of the country. In the past 2 weeks, new reports came in, and the SG has spoken extensively regarding journalist situation and the media. More journalists have gone missing or were harassed in the east of Ukraine. Journalists attempting to report on MH17 crash, including representatives of Dagens Nyheter, BBC, The Daily Beast, Newsuur, Time and Russia Today, were detained and harassed by armed gangs. As of the 15th of July, 13,381 people have moved from Crimea, and a new wave of IDPs is expected during the year, in addition to the already large numbers of IDPs. Harassment and discrimination against ethnic Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, representatives of religious and other minorities continue. The restrictions on movement and right to peaceful assembly continue as well. Crimean Tatar leaders Mustafa Djemilev and Rifat Chubarov have been barred from entering their homeland by the Russian occupying authorities. Written records of execution orders authorized and signed personally by the so-called commander-in-chief of the illegal Donetsk People's Republic, Igor Girkin, aka Strelkov, and also of hearings of self-proclaimed military tribunals convicting people to death have been found in Slovyansk. An illegal militant group representing no one but themselves and headed by foreign passport holders whose sole authority on the ground stems from the guns they carry, grants itself the authority to assign and execute extrajudiciary death sentences on an illegally occupied territory. The mass graves discovered recently in areas liberated by the Ukrainian forces are a tragic testimony to the degree of lawlessness that marks the insurgent actions. Armed separatists are increasingly better armed, as the ASG just testified, using heavy weaponry, including mortars, anti-aircraft guns, tanks and armored vehicles. They continue to shoot down helicopters and planes, including in high altitudes, including the downing this week of a Ukrainian military plane and transport helicopter. Sources on the ground indicate the tendency of the last days that whenever Ukrainian troops deploy sufficient power to pose a threat to militants and are in a position to launch strikes against their positions, The illegal armed groups redeployed to a nearby town, exposing civilian populations to combat risk and forcing them to flee as they install their armed vehicles, artillery and Grad rocket launchers in residential areas. Government's efforts to establish ceasefire or humanitarian corridors have been repeatedly violated by the insurgents. While Russia is quick to blame the Ukrainian authorities, we're yet to hear a single condemnation by Russia of the reckless acts by the insurgents, including around the crash site of the Malaysian civilian airliner. We fully agree with the SG on the importance of a thorough and independent investigation into the crash and the need to bring those responsible to account. The OSCE monitoring mission reports have confirmed facts of movement of armed individuals across the Russian border into Ukraine and back. Instead of closing its borders to such illegal movements or mercenaries and weapons, Russia continues to play war games at Ukraine's eastern border. Once again, alarmingly large numbers of combat-ready troops and armaments are amassed on Ukraine's borders. Defense Minister Shoigu's latest statements on the combat readiness of Russian so-called peacekeepers are also highly alarming and once again raise serious questions about Russia's true intentions in the region. No less troubling is Russia's ongoing escalation of Cold War rhetoric against Europe and the West, now extended into sanctioning food imports, which will undoubtedly affect the Russian population itself. All these actions are the exact opposite to confidence building and de-escalation that is so badly needed and for which the international community has called repeatedly. While we are seriously concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in east of Ukraine and the civilian suffering, and the ASG again has spoken extensively about this, we have to be very clear. The key to ending this suffering is in the hands of Russia, and it hinges on its continued support to illegal armed separatist groups. I thank you, Mr. President.